Hello, and welcome back to MakeCode Jam's online Bits and Bytes lessons. My name is Jen. I'm an instructor with MakeCode Jam, and I'll be walking you through today's lesson. We are finishing up our MakeCode arcade unit today with an activity that teaches students how to add more than one player to the game. So in the past few activities, we've only focused on having one player. This time we're going to learn how to code in two players and how to control them so that you can have two people playing the game at the same time. It's a little longer activity, so you may need to pause and take a break every so often. That's okay. And then also have the activity sheet handy just in case. It will probably be useful for this. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to escape. So in a new browser or on a new browser tab, go ahead and go to arcade.makecode.com. And once you're there, you're going to come down to this new project button. So press that. Name your project. So like normal, I'm just going to name mine the same as the activity sheet. So my multiplayer catch, create. And if this is your first time working with us, that's fine. It's not too difficult of an activity, but just to do a refresher, this is our game simulator. This is where we're going to be able to test out our game to see what's working and not working. These are our block drawers. They're where we'll go to find the blocks we need, and this is our workspace. Down here you can stop the game, refresh, debug. This one turns the sound on and off. I'm wearing headphones, so you guys won't actually hear any sound if the game is allowed to play in the background while we're coding, but I will. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this off so a loud sound doesn't go off in the middle of me teaching and scare me. This one shows us the controls used for one player and two players, so you guys might want to remember that for a little later. You can take a screenshot, and this enters full screen so that all you see is the game instead of all the code. If you have certain devices, you can download these games and play them there, but we're just going to work in the browser. If you want, you can rename your game here and then just press the save icon. And that also downloaded it to my computer, but I don't really need it there. Or you can export it to GitHub. Over here you have undo and redo, and then zoom out and zoom in. So if you need to see more space on your screen, you can zoom out. If you need a closer view, you can zoom in. So that's the basic setup. Like I said, we're going to focus today on adding two players to our game, which means we're going to be using 3 sprites as opposed to our normal 2. But before we even get there, we're going to go ahead and add our background. We're going to set our background for this. So because there are so many steps, I tried to keep this simple. If you guys want to go back and make your background more elaborate or more interesting looking, you're welcome to, but we're going to stay pretty simple for now. The first thing you're going to do is go to the scene drawer with the pine tree next to it, and you're going to get this set tile map to block. So we have to scroll down a little here to tiles, and then get this set tile map to block and insert it inside our onStart block. Once you've done that, go ahead and click the gray square, and it's going to bring up this workspace for us, this editor. The first thing I want you guys to do before you select your square is we're going to change the size of this screen so that we are only working in a space that shows on the actual game simulator. So when we come into these workspaces, these squares are actually a lot bigger than what's seen here. So a lot of times there will be space underneath or above or to the left or to the right. That's so if you want to be able to have that feeling of movement and follow your character up and down and everything. For this game, we're just going to stay within the visible screen. So we're going to change the size. So if you clicked out, go back to the gray square. And in this bottom left corner, you're going to see 2 numbers. They say 16 by 16. That means our screen size is a 16 by 16 grid. So we're going to change that first 16 to 10 by just clicking on the 16, highlighting it or deleting it and typing 10. And then that second 16 is going to change to an 8. So we're going to cut that in half. So this is going to fit within our screen. And once you're done, just click up here in this gray square spot where you see my cursor. So this will, this is going to just be the screen that's visible. And then the next thing we're going to do is you can pick any tile you want. So there's a couple options under forest, and you can use these left and right arrows to click through the pages. I used the dungeon option, and on the, I think it's the second page, I used this block right here. So there's no special reason other than we were trying to show you how to search for things and find different things in the tile gallery. So this is on the second page under dungeon, 4th row, 3rd column. So I just clicked that. And now if I drag it over, if I take my cursor over here, you can see that that little square is showing up. So we're just going to draw 2 rows at the bottom. So I'm going to come down here, and if you look next to our coordinate, our grid size here, our 10 by 8, right to the right you'll see a 0 by 7. That tells you where my cursor is. So I'm going to start with my cursor there at 0 by 7 and click down and draw a row all the way across. And then I'm going to come up 1 and draw a second row on top of that. There's some other things you can do with this and other activities. You know, we've done walls so that you can't go down here. You can do that if you want. I'm not going to this time. So once you have these 2 rows, just go ahead and click done. And you can see my game's refreshing, and now those 2 rows appear there. So that's it for our background. Like I said, not super exciting. You can, of course, go back and change things if you want, but that's all I'm going to do. So the first thing we're going to do is set our player 1 sprite. So we're of course going to go to the sprites drawer here. It's blue, has the paper airplane. And we're going to get a create my sprite block. And in the past, we've let you guys just keep these default variable names, but today we're going to change it because we have so many different sprites that we're going to work with. So to do that, you're going to click the drop down button right after the word my sprite. And then come down here and click rename variable. So a variable is kind of like a stand-in for anything we want to put in it. So we're going to use this as a player sprite, and it's going to store, let's say, for this one I'm going to make the player 1 sprite a cat. So it's going to store the cat sprite in there, but it could be a dog or a fish or anything. So we can constantly replace what sprite we use for player 1, but it will always be attached to the name player 1. So I hit rename variable, and we're just going to name this player 1 and press OK. So anytime we want to work with player 1, we're going to make sure the variable name says player 1. So once you've renamed your variable, come to the gray square and go to the gallery, or you can use the other editor and draw your own. I'm going to go to the gallery, and like I said, I'm going to use a cat. So here's the cats right here. You can pick whatever you want. If you don't want to use the cat, you don't have to. So I picked the cat, and I'm going to press done, and the cat's going to appear in the center of my game over here. Right. So now that we have our player 1 sprite, we need to do a couple more things with it. We need to give it a starting position, and we need to say how we're going to control it. So for player 1, we're going to set it over here towards the left of the screen, sorry. So because we use tiles, we could use 2 blocks, right? We could use the set my sprite position to XY block, which use the coordinates of the screen, or we can set it based on the tiles, so the column and row of the tiles, which is what we're going to do. So go to the scene drawer again and scroll down to that tile section and look for the place my sprite on top of tile map column 0 row 0 block. So we're going to drag this block and place it under our player 1, our create player 1 sprite block. And so remember, this is a good reminder. So you can see you're getting an arrow here. That's because we don't have we're not using a variable named my sprite. So the very first thing we need to do is use this drop down and set it to player 1. So we're attaching this positioning block to our player 1 sprite by doing that. And then we're going to set our player 1. So as you can see, column 0 is up in the left corner, as is column 1. So this is column 0, row 0. We're going to change the position to column 1, so 0 to 1 after column, which is going to move our sprite over to the right by 1. And then we're going to set it on top of row 5. So that's going to set it on top of our tiles here. So 0 to 5. And the cat's going to come down here. So remember 0, 0 is in this corner, and then as we move to the left, the rows increase, and as we move down, as we move to the left, the columns increase, and as we move down, the rows increase. Alright, so the very last thing we're going to do with this sprite for right now is give it a way to move it. So go to the controller drawer, and it's this red one with the controller icon next to it, and just go ahead and get this Move My Sprite with Buttons block, and drag it into our OnStart block. And just like before, we don't have a MySprite variable. We're not using that name. We're using player1. So use this drop down and change MySprite to player1. Oops. Sorry. So it's going to take a second to refresh, and now that warning or that error is gone. So that's our player1 sprite. We still need to do our player2 and then get the object that they're going to catch. So for player 2, we're going to go a little faster this time because we're pretty much repeating these two blocks here. So go back to the Sprite drawer and get another Set My Sprite block 2 and drag that in underneath our move. And just like before, we're going to rename our sprite name. So click that drop down button, select Rename Variable from that menu, and name this player 2. And then you can click on the gray square and choose your player 2. So I used a cat for player 1, I'm going to use a dog for player 2. And the dog is right here, it's this little yellow thing. So I click the dog and I'm done, and that's all we need to do for that step. And then just like we did for the first player sprite, we're going to set the position using this on top of tile map column row block. So go back to scene, look for the tile section, and then find place my sprite on top of tile map column 0, row 0, and set it inside. So again, we're not using the variable name my sprite, and we want to position player 2. So use that drop down and change the name to player 2. And then we're going to place this in column 8. So pretty much over almost to the edge here. Remember our columns are 10. So they actually start at 0 and go to 9. So 9 would be our last column here. So 8 is just one from the end. And then we're going to set it on row 5 as well. So it's going to be at the same row level as player 1. So they're starting almost from the same position, same height, and we're going to have an object up here that they're going to try to catch. But before we get to there, we need to set that object. So one more time, go to the Sprite store and get this Create My Sprite block. And we're going to rename this one just to keep practicing that. And we're going to name it Food 1. And then you guys can choose your sprite image that you want. I used this pizza. So the more pixelated the image you choose, the smaller it's going to be. If you choose one of these really clear looking pizzas or the taco here, any of these, they're going to be really big on the screen, so I tend to stick with the more pixelated ones, but you guys can do whatever you want for this. And then before we left the kind, both as player, because these are both player sprites, but this one we're going to choose food. And that's going to allow us to handle the sprite objects differently based on what kind they are. Okay, so we're going to have our food placed at the top and then let it fall, and then the players our players can try to catch it. So to do that, we need to go to, this time we are going to use that position block from the Sprite store. So go to Sprites and use the Set My Position block 2. So if you want, you can use the tile map blocks, but because this isn't really interacting with the tiles, I decided to use the position X and Y block. And again, we're not using the variable name MySprite, so we're going to change it to Food 1. Your X value is going to be 80, and your Y value is going to be 10. So it's going to be in the middle at the top of our screen. So a quick pause here, just like our columns start at 0, 0, our XY coordinates start at 0, 0. Going from left to right, it goes from 0 on the left all the way to 160 on the right. So 80 is in the middle. And from the top, it starts at 0 in the far left corner, and all the way down to the bottom, this is 120. So 0 to 120 from the top. And the last thing we're going to do in our startup code is set the speed or the acceleration at which it falls. So go back to that Sprite drawer, and you're going to get this set my Sprite X to 0 block, and we're going to change a lot here. So obviously the first thing we want to do, we're setting how fast the pizza falls, or whatever food object you have falls. So we want to attach this to the food sprite by changing the variable name. And then we're going to do acceleration AY. So we're going to do acceleration on the Y axis. So you're going to come here and go AY, and then in parentheses it says acceleration Y. And then finally you're going to change that 0 to 20. So acceleration is how fast it speeds up. So it's going to speed up by 20 as it falls. So it will start kind of slow and then get faster. So that's our start, and then we're going to do more with that in just a bit. But before we come back and do interactions with all of our sprites, we're going to build some code so that we can move our player 2 sprite. So if you remember, we gave player 1 these controls with buttons, which means they can use these buttons here on the game to move around, or they can use the arrow keys on the keyboard. Right? But we didn't give anything for player 2. So we're going to give player 2 A or B, and we're going to do that by using the, in the controller drawer, go to the on A button press block and drag that into our workspace. And then go to the sprites drawer and get the change my sprite X to 0 block. So right here, change my sprite X by 0. And insert that inside the on A button press block. And we're going to do two things with this change block. We're going to change my sprite to player 2. And then we're going to change 0 to positive 10. So that positive 10 is going to let us move to the right by 10. So if you click A now, the dog is going to move to the right. But you can see it moved off the screen, and I can't get it back without refreshing. So we're going to add the B button in there, and we're going to do a quick shortcut. Right click on this block, or press down if you're using a tablet until you get this duplicate menu, this pop-up menu. Select duplicate and drag it off over here. So it's grayed out because this matches exactly this block. So the very first thing we want to do is change A to B, and that will make this block active. And then the only other thing we need to do here is change 10 to a negative 10. That negative sign is right after the 0 on your keyboard. So you're just going to click that and get the negative sign and then type 10. And that will move us to the left by 10. So now the game will refresh over here. And you can see I can move the dog left, and if I go off the screen, I just click A and I bring the dog back. And if I go off the screen too far to the right, just click B. So same with the cat. If you guys move the cat around and they go up or down too much, you just move back in the opposite direction you came, and that will fix it. Alright, so now we're ready to start doing our interactions and figuring out how to win the game and stuff like that. So go back to your sprites drawer and go to the overlaps section. So you see like there's effects here and projectiles. We want overlaps, and get this first block that says on sprite of kind player overlaps other sprite of kind player. Okay, and then the only thing we're going to do with this block is change this second player to food. And the very first thing we want to do is increase our score. So the score block is kept in this info drawer here with the ID card next to it. And so you're going to get this change score by 1. There we go. So I'm going to pause that. I'm just going to let it go there. So what's going to happen is that if one of our player sprites can catch the falling pizza, the score will go up. And this score is for everyone. So this game, instead of playing against each other, this game is working together to win. You can modify it later so that you have to play against each other, and whoever hits a score first is the one who wins. The next thing we want to do is, once we've caught the pizza, we're going to reset the food sprite to fall again. So go to Sprites and get the set position block. Right? Yes, set my sprite position to XY. And you're going to use the drop down to change it to food. And we're going to change the Y. So after the Y, we're going to change that to 10. So it's going to be just a little bit off of the edge again when we interact with it and fall. But we're going to have it randomly appear somewhere from left to right. So to do that, you're going to go to the math drawer and get a pick random 0 to 10 block and insert that into the circle after the X. So you can see I have the 2 red dots connected to each other. That means I can release, and it will pop in there. And then you're going to change that 10 in the pick random block, change that 10 to a 160. And then the other thing we're going to do is reset our acceleration. So go back to sprites and get the set my sprite X to 0 block. And use the drop down to change that to food 1. Use the drop down button next to the X to change that to a Y, acceleration Y. And we're just going to keep this set to 20. Okay, so just a few more steps. We're almost done here. The last thing we're going to do is set our winning condition. So we're going to try and get to a score of 10 between both players catching the pizza. And then once we hit 10, we're going to end the game and say you won. So go to the logic drawer and get this if-then block. So what we're going to do is say, if this statement is true, then do this. So we're going to say, if the score equals 10, then end the game. So go back to that logic drawer and get this 0 equals 0 block and insert it where it says true. And then I'm going to change this 0 on the right side of the equal sign to 10. And then we're going to go back to the info drawer here. So we're getting an arrow because 0 equals 10 is false. That's not an accurate statement. So we're going to go back to the info drawer and get this score variable. So this is just like our player 1 or player 2 variable names. This keeps track of the score for us, and it was already created. So we're just going to grab the score variable block and insert it on the side with the remaining 0. And now this says if score equals 10, then now we're going to add our in-game condition. So get game over lose block, insert it inside, change lose to win by just clicking on it. And now if you go to play your game, you can see it gets faster. So you can also see that the cat can go down below. There's lots of things you can do here. So like I was saying, you could do a losing condition. You could go back, actually you could go even further back than that. You could go back to tiles and add a wall. So add the wall feature to those tiles. And you could have the game, you could have it say you lose the game if the pizza touches the tiles instead of letting the cat go all the way down there to get it. And I just showed you the cat because I can't move the dog and the cat at the same time. You could add a second food item for them to catch. And you can, this would be a little bit more code, but you could also add, you could have them have 2 separate scores. So it would be player 1 versus player 2 as opposed to, right now it's player 1 and player 2 work together. So there's lots of things you can do to make this game harder and more interactive. It would just be a little bit more code, and our activity would go a little longer than we would like. But yeah, there's a lot more you can do, and I think between the last 3 activities and this one, you can kind of figure that out. And we look forward to seeing you at the next our live lessons. So the next unit is going to be our first digital literacy unit, and we're going to be talking about cybersecurity things that keep us safe online. And it's going to be a different format. It won't be coding activities. It will be unplugged or offline activities that we work through together during the live lessons. So you're welcome, of course, to sign up for those. You can just go to our website, youthcodejam.org, and then go under Jam at Home, go to Bits and Bytes Online. And that button is always right here, register for the live session. So like I said, next week we will be doing, this will all be updated by the end of Wednesday, August 19th. So we will be doing our first digital literacy series that focuses on being safe online. So kids are going to learn how to spot someone who may not be being honest, or spot phishing emails, so emails that are trying to trick you. They're going to learn about encryption and decoding, and how to do a strong password. And all of these are going to be done with fun activities and kind of puzzle games that we've come up with. But they will be unplugged. And let's see, they are open for students in grades K through 2. Grades K through 12. Students in grades K through 2 are going to need an adult's help. Just because the work is not super advanced, but it might be a little bit more than what they've worked with before. So if there's an adult or maybe an older sibling who can help at home so that they can participate, that would be really good, because in the large group environments, it's harder for us to work with them. They have a little bit more barrier to the activities because of the technology. So we do ask that if you have a student in grades K through 2, that maybe you can stay online and help them with that. But devices won't matter so much for the next 2 weeks, because it will just be logging onto Zoom, and then if you want to participate in a competition, filling out a Google form at the end. So that should be accessible on any device for students, so it shouldn't matter what device you're working on, which will be probably a nice change. So yeah, I hope to see you guys for that. We're really excited. If that's not something that interests you, we'll be coming back after those 2 weeks for another coding unit. So we're kind of alternating between strict coding lessons and then some other computer science stuff. So just to make sure we're covering everything and doing a variety of things. But I'm really excited for this next unit. But that's it. So I hope you guys have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week.